Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of our educational series for the 2021-22 school year. I'm Christine Pennington.
And I'm Susanna Lemanu Harris. And today we'll be talking about banishing biases. A lot of people think they don't have bias, but we do have unconscious bias. But let me give you a little bit about myself and why I really feel very passionate about this subject. My name is, you know my name, and I am a first generation American. Both my parents were immigrants. My father spoke Italian. He came to the country when he was 23. My mother came to the country when she was 9 years old. She's from Ecuador. So my grandparents spoke Spanish, my mother spoke Spanish. And when I went to school sometimes, I felt like the teachers didn't actually want to talk to my parents, and they felt like they just, because of the accent, and sometimes, the broken English that people talk about is a bias, and you have to accept people for that. Also, I felt like, going to school sometimes, because my mother was, working, and in the time period that I grew up, she wasn't very involved with the PTA. I also had bias because I wasn't very much involved with those activities. And sometimes when there was award ceremonies, I didn't get those awards because my mother wasn't on the PTA. So, my when I went to college, I have a degree in anthropology, cultural anthropology. It's a BA from SUNY Stony Brook, which is a state university. Then I received my elementary education master's, and then I went into school administration. And within my college years too, I felt bias from professors. One time a professor said to me, "Oh, you dress nice all the time. Minorities dress nice all the time." And I didn't really know how to take that. And I didn't, back in the 90s, it was a different story. Now people would be like, girls that were our age then, right, Christine, they would have, said something about that. But we didn't say things about that. But we need to be conscious about the things we say to children. So when I talk about bias, I'm talking about, the child that's coming into your class. Maybe their parent is such a pain, right? They're always calling you for the stupidest things. They're so minuscule, but they're not worried about their academics or their, student growth. They're looking for you to just, oh, you took away their, candy at lunch, or because they're not supposed to have candy. And, you have these feelings about these people that are in your, kids that are in your room and their parents, but we really have to, put that aside. We all have biases. They're unconscious biases. I taught a class at Stony Brook also after I graduated. It was called Understanding Other Cultures, and it was a professional development degree for teachers. So everyone in my room was a teacher, and that was my first question when I walked in. Do you stereotype? And everyone's like, no, no. Because honestly, I think, right, we try to feel like we're fair-minded, right? We do really try to feel that way.
Right. And I like to speak on, I have a father who is from the mountains of Virginia. And so as a child, I very thick accent, not an immigrant, but very thick accent, and very intelligent man, but sometimes people would stop at the accent if it was different from him, and I noticed that as a kid. I noticed that was a barrier. That, I mean, it gave him tough skin, and he got past that. But there was that barrier. I mean, that took people a little bit longer to place value on what he was saying because they were stereotyping him based on his accent. The other piece that I wanted to touch upon is when you're talking about a classroom. I know as a classroom teacher, we've all been there where someone has said to us, "Oh my gosh, you have so and so coming into your class. When they were in my class, yada, yada, yada." And as a teacher, I always made sure that I didn't pull their cumulative file. I didn't pull their record and look back at behavioral problems. I didn't look back at grades. If I needed that, I knew that was there later on in the school year, at least 3, 4 weeks in, after I developed a relationship with that student, because we carry that's such an unconscious bias.
Yes,
When
yes.
someone else, feeds that negativity, that belief into us that we're going to have a problem with this kid, then they could come into our room, and if we're not cautious of it, we can easily start to develop.
Demonstrate our bias because it's in our subconscious. Okay,
Right,
so we're going to talk about the unconscious bias, right?
right.
And that's so true. And then also, Christine and I work in a very small town. So you have the family dynamic. Oh, I went to high school with the mother or the father, and I don't really care because I don't really know them. And
Right.
I'm taking every child as they come. And I think that we should be doing that whether we're teaching or we're doing
Meeting someone,
meeting
yeah.
someone for the
Right.
first time.
Yeah.
Piercings in your ears, tattoos. I have tattoos. People first impression is everything. So I think that we need to really, really stop and think about that, you know, and because we have to consciously think about our biases. Now, they could be political, they could be cultural, ethnic, they can also be gender, ageism. I mean, these are all components. So, yes,
Yeah, I
yeah.
was just going to say, the story that I tell early on in my teaching years. You come in and you're going to change the world and you're going to save everyone. But oftentimes you come in very naive to really what some of our students have experienced, what their life really looks like. And that's such a bias that we talk about is like, if I am teaching a predominantly minority class and I'm a Caucasian female, and I have to be cautious that I don't make assumptions. And so on the flip side, I work really hard to not make assumptions, but that naiveness about me was really called out and caught me off guard, and it really made me aware of not fully understanding where your students come from can really hinder your relationships with your students. I was teaching a second grade class. It was Easter. I had my preconceived notions of what Easter would look like based on what I did with my children. We went to church, we had a family dinner, the Easter bunny visit,
Right, the
yeah,
Easter
Easter egg
icon.
hunt, yeah. So I asked one of my students, I was like, "What are you doing for Easter?" And he was so like, "I'm going to visit my uncle." And he was so elated with excitement. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's going to be a great trip. It sounds like you're really excited." So then we come back to school, and I got chill bumps thinking about it because you hurt after the fact for what students do go through. And I said to him, I said, "How was your trip visiting your uncle?" And I asked where he lived, and of course I was new to the area where I taught, so I didn't know the town he was speaking of. And so he's like, I said, "Well, did you have a big meal? Did you do an Easter egg hunt?" All these things that in my brain you do at Easter. "Did you go to church?" And he said, "No, no. We were only there for an hour, and then they told us visiting hours were over." So, I mean, it was just heart wrenching that his excitement was to go visit his uncle for 1 hour in prison. And it totally was beyond my naive self to think that this was what a second grader would be doing. So, we have to be cognizant that
Yes,
lifestyles are different,
very, very much so.
and at that time I just made sure I masked my bewilderment with a smile because I hurt for that child, but he was happy. That was his life, and that is his life, and he was happy to have that cherished time together wherever it was. So just trying not to judge, and that was just a preconceived notion of what my life experience was isn't exactly what everyone's
Right.
is.
And we also need to look at the census, right, of where we work. So right now, I don't really have that diversity like I had when I worked with New York City public schools. But in New York City public schools, I had a lot of, girls that wear hagibs, or some people call them burqas. And, so when they came in, at their age, they weren't allowed to take pictures after they started their first menstrual cycle. They had to, like, not do the dance festivals we were doing. And, I would say to them, "Oh, okay." And one day, we had lunch together, and they put the hagib on me, and I took a picture. because I wanted them to know that I understand what, I want to know about you. You know about me. I share things with you, share things with me. And I think that that's that building the relationships with our students. It's also understanding, because some kids are not allowed to look you in the eye when you're talking to them. That's a respect issue, and we as Americans are like, look me in the eye, I need you to look me in the eye, and we have to understand that, because if we look at the census, mi gente, my people, the Latinos, Latinxers, we're kind of building up we're making most of the population now in the United States. And not that you have to go out and learn Spanish or anything like that, but you have to be, understanding to other people's, culture. So also like Ramadan in the Islam religion, kids, I had some students that would not eat. They were, they wanted to fast, even though they didn't have to. They did want to, and that could be stressful during the day. You know what it's like, and they're not allowed to chew gum. That, and when they're talking about fasting, it's not like growing up Catholic, like drinking water and having a little snack. No, it's serious fasting, and they eat before sunrise, and then they eat at sundown. We have to be, understanding of that. Their holidays, what they celebrate, it's just so many different facets to it. And sometimes you might be the minority in the room. Like I've taught in, I have some school pictures from some years that I had the lightest complexion. So, it doesn't really, we're bringing in and culturing them to our lifestyles, and they act, and we're learning from them also. And that goes for it. And like I said, it's that unconscious bias that we have. So some kids might come in your class some days, and I know that I had this with the election this year, and they're talking about Trump and Biden and this and that, and I'm like, all right, guys, I'm glad you're like really, but they're not really sometimes knowing what they're talking about. They're just listening to the adults in their life. So that's why we, again, are the mentors. We are with them, and this is that job that really is that calling, like we talked about last time, that you have to really put in your 2 cents sometimes and say, and gear them the right way. And knowing that information is everything, so that they don't have biases, because I've heard racial things in my room, and I try to cut them right down right away, and that's the way you need to run your classroom. And if your school is not like that, that's the next video.
Right.
you know
Right. Well, and I would say in this, like we really do have a beautiful opportunity right now in our world. Some people want to look at society in a negative way, that there's such a division and there's such a diversity. I think it's a beautiful thing, that because that's really what makes our world go around, and we have the opportunity to unite. We worked on a project together, and that was the theme of it was two diverse groups, family backgrounds, and the uniting together for a good cause. And the purpose here of an educator really is, like you were mentioning, just the political stance, is that you have the ability as a teacher to say, hey, wait a second, let's go ahead and understand, like, there's probably good points to both sides, and maybe if you research this, you would learn something, or if you research that, you would have a different perspective. And I think when we
And debates are wonderful.
Right.
I love debates,
Right.
because you can't. I always tell kids, if you say I don't like peanut butter, but why don't you like it? Is it the texture? Is it the taste? Is it you don't like the way it feels in your mouth or going down your throat? It has to be. There has to be a reason. Or
Right.
if you don't like a show or a book
Right.
or something like that, you have to have reasons behind things. So showing them to make an argument.
Right. And if we're not teaching our students, regardless of age, that they have a voice and that they are the catalyst for change, if we're not showing them tolerance and unity, and if we can't effectively show that to students if we haven't come to terms with what we might carry as a bias, or what we might take in as based on a personal experience. We have to learn how to set that aside and how to teach that one experience or one person within a race or a gender does not make the whole group. Okay, so we're, if we have one negative experience, that does not, you should not
Or
stereotype.
judge,
Right.
a whole group of people because of one person.
Right.
Because in every, like you've heard before, in every culture there is, good and bad, and people. We are people, and we're judged by our character, not by, like Martin Luther King said, the color of our skin. However, we need to have those talks because it's important. Christine and I talk all the time about what we feel and how we feel. Sometimes we get into like a little bit of this, and we have our thoughts, but
I'm always right.
but that we have to understand that everyone has biases. Like, to say we don't, it's like we're fooling ourselves. So you do, okay? Because I'm a Latina, and I know that my grandparents used words sometimes that would as terms of endearment that some Americans, gringos, would think they were derogatory,
Right. Right.
so these are things that I know. One time I was with my grandmother, and she was talking about my friend that was Dominican, and and she was like, your grandmother, and it's just like just certain things. Like, sometimes you don't understand. I think that if you look at yourself and be fair-minded, you know what I mean, and
Right.
and think and just say, oh, maybe what I did. And it's always good to go back and evaluate yourself every day and think about that, because it could just be your bias against that really pain in the bleep kid in your class, sorry to
Right.
say, that is giving you a hard time, and you might have some issues
Right.
with showing him fairness in your classroom like you do other children.
Others,
Yeah.
So when we talk about banishing our biases, ridding us of those biases, one of my favorite activities, and it's been effective no matter what grade I've taught, whether elementary, middle, on up. I feel like it's a great activity when you have a new group of individuals together, and it could be outside of a classroom setting. It could be a youth group, it could be sports, it could be adults. I love the opportunity for my students to write like 5, 6 things about themselves, and you can target it: my favorite food, my favorite color, my favorite sport, some of the things that are age specific to children. My favorite TikToker to follow, or what have you, depending on the age group. And then you share out, okay, well, everybody whose favorite color is green, raise your hand. And you start to show students that
We have so many similarities.
right, that we're alike in so many ways. And so that builds the foundation to find what's interesting that we are not alike in. And so, and then that's the other piece to the activity, is sharing, having them share, well, tell us one thing that maybe no one would know about you. And as a teacher, I would always try to be very raw and real. I'd be like, well, when I was 5, I had a lazy eye with that, looked in at my nose, and my kids are like, oh my God, and something that's real to me, that I wanted to show that there's an imperfection, so that kids could know that they can identify, and then I always wore glasses growing up, so that the students in my class wearing glasses, now it's posh,
Yeah.
but years ago that was a thing. Nobody wanted to wear glasses
Because they didn't have good designs. That's
That's
why.
right. That's right. So I feel like it's very important for the teacher to be real, to show emotion, to show truth about who she or he is, and so
I
kids
agree.
can identify.
And coming from New York City public schools, where we weren't allowed to celebrate holidays or anything like that, because we did have such a diverse population. But something that you can do, that I used to do, it depends on their grade level, but they could do a research report about a country. I know high school, you can do that in world geography or something like that. And researching and writing are very important. They can do a country. It could be the country that they can identify with, their ancestry. Then, they presentation, that's one of their standards of learning, or Common Core standard, or whatever state you're in. That's something they can do. And then at the end, if it's near Christmas time or something like that, or holiday time, whatever holiday break it is, they bring a dish in, and you as the teacher facilitate this, of course. And they, you make sure you don't get like everybody bringing in an entree. You want to have desserts and appetizers too. And then I used to set up my room with tablecloths. I would get them like fake little chalices. When we would just have so much fun.
Right.
And parents really enjoy doing that too, because they feel like, wow, you care about where we come from.
Right.
You care about us, and you want to learn about our culture. And I think that coming as a first generation American, immigrants love when you want to know about their culture, because they American, America that's what it's
Right.
supposed to be. We are a foundation of immigrants, right? However, we forget that sometimes. So, just those, getting that in, and then it doesn't have to even be a bias about ethnicity, like I said before, or racial backgrounds. When I moved down to Virginia too, I remember, working, and people would pass my room to see what I was wearing, or see what kind of shoes I was wearing. So like, or they would say things
She
about
always has stylish shoes.
The kids, like I remember one of the kids said, you have, they have, I'm not making fun of Southern accents, but he was like, you have a funny accent. And I said, and you have a funny accent where I'm from too. So, we can make a joke out of it. You know what I mean? Because sometimes you can take it personal, and you don't want to take it personal. Like one kid said once, I'm speaking Mexican. And I was like, no, teachable moment. No, the conquistadors came. That's why, South America, Central America, everyone speaks Spanish. They came from Spain. You have to teach that, because
Right.
kids don't know. And if they're
Right.
not cultured, their parents aren't doing that for them, then that is our job as educators to do that for our students.
Right. And that's a piece of growing. We talk about students and how worldly they are and what their world vision or world view is. It's often very small. I mean, we teach in a rural area, and we see kids not even getting across the county and thinking that they're in another state, or in a whole nother city, or our capital or something. And we're like, no, we've only gone 15 minutes down the road. We're still in the same county. So it's all
Right.
often tied to what their experience is and what their worldview is. And again, teachable moments are definitely important. And one thing I wanted to pop in after 20 plus years of teaching and experience and together over that, we've all been where there's a new teacher, there's a seasoned teacher, there's some teachers in between, and fresh out of college, you think what you learned is the cutting edge. You
You are.
think you got it all.
You're the bomb, diggity
Yeah,
bomb.
you're coming in, you got it all figured out, you don't need anyone's help. And there's a bias right there.
Yes.
And that is, as we continue to teach in a pandemic, that's something that I feel like we really need to think about. When you turn away help, or you judge the teacher that's a seasoned teacher, and you're like, no, she's not going to be able to handle virtual learning. Maybe she needs to retire. And you find out, oh my gosh, she was the best virtual learner, and you could have learned something from her.
Right.
So we have to think about our biases within our profession, because I've
And
noticed.
manners. I think, like, if somebody,
Yes.
if I gave, I remember when I first started teaching and an older teacher brought me things, even if I didn't use it, I still took it, because
Right.
from their generation and their perspective, it's respectful.
Right.
And manners matter, okay? And
Right.
we want the kids to have manners. We as educators need to have them too.
And I agree. And I think back at like what I was saying, we think when we step out of college, we have the cutting edge material,
Yeah.
and we know everything. Education is very cyclical. Yeah, if you think about some of the things that were going on 30 plus years ago to some of your seasoned teachers and what they speak on and what they have experienced, and then you start to see a perfect example, traditional math and then we roll into some new math, and we're seeing a transition back to like, oh, nope, let's head back to traditional ways. So we start to see that things can be very cyclical. And so don't discount what an elder or a midway season teacher or a teacher from a different district, um, a teacher from a different department. I
Yes.
mean, even a different department, you can learn so much. You can modify lessons. You can, tweak something. We never steal. We always borrow as educators and make it our own. But I want to say that that's a bias too. I've seen in our
Yes, I
profession.
agree. Yes, definitely. That ageism component also. And I feel like, this is the time, right? And that's where I go back to the fair-mindedness, because we have the critical race theory. That's a big thing going on in school districts. You see board meetings online. You're just like, and then I look at people crying because, they're white. They're Caucasian. They I guess they can trace their ancestry here to, like, to 1619, when slaves came, or however it went, and they feel very they take it very personally. And there was one video I saw, and this woman was crying at a board meeting, and I said, and it changed my perspective, because I'm like, wow, that's where that fair-mindedness comes in. She feels like she's fair-minded, and why should people think that her race is wrong to do these things? So that's, we got to look at perspectives, right? We got to, the scope, we look through things, and things, we have to look at everybody's way of thinking, because that's how we are going to come together, not just as a nation, but
Right.
school districts, everybody. This is how we're going to raise our kids to be better people, if we show them that we have to see everyone's perspective, because that's that non-bias. I want to see something non-biased. So me watching that woman, whatever my opinion was, I just felt bad for her, because I saw her hurt about that she's a white woman, and she feels like, wow, you're going to make me look bad, and then we also have to think that we are going to have to come back, because there are things as Americans, us,
Regardless of race.
regardless of race or anything, that we have done to other
Right.
countries. You know what I mean? And
Right.
and we have to look at that also, because we've done some things as Americans in wars and things like that. And even we have a friend that has a Japanese background. Her father has experienced things. So we have done things. So we have to really come together as educators, because this is the next generation, and we
Right.
have to teach them these tools in their big toolbox like we have.
Right.
Pull it out, and teachable moments
Right.
that come along.
And we always speak on, and it's very common conversation in our classrooms, that I want you to learn the standards, I want you to learn the subject matter, but most importantly, I want you to learn the life skills. And that, at the end of the day, has become more and more of our role as educators, are teaching those life skills, because good life skills, good foundation, leads to successful people.
Right.
And, after they leave academia and they're out in the real world, our kids need to know how to function. That we need to know that they have the tools to be successful, but to be kind, good citizens, because they are our next generation.
Yes.
And, we talk about, being non-biased and looking from a different perspective. And in my household, they always use the term devil's advocate. Mom's always playing devil's advocate, and everyone gets so up, and I'm like, well, maybe they thought this way, or maybe, have you ever thought that maybe she was thinking da 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 da? And the point being is, I do want my children, even my personal home, my kids at home and my kids at school, I want them to stretch their mind. And as I have through the years been doing that with my kids, wanting to strengthen and give them a more worldly view, it has strengthened me, and it has given me a better view and a better perception and a better understanding, instead of that tunnel vision of maybe what my life experiences were or where I was raised from. It has opened my eyes to see that at the end of the day, we're all human, and we all want to feel accepted, we want to feel loved, and we want to feel valued.
Right. And that goes to that crystallized, she's talking about like that crystallized intelligence, where you think one way, to your fluid intelligence. We want, and to piggyback on you, about, these are the next generation. You want your children in your classroom. Like I've always said, I want you to be a good citizen. Like if you didn't learn anything this year, or you don't want to take anything from what you learned academically this year, please be, know that when you walk out this door, you have been trained to be a good
Right.
citizen, a global citizen, not just a citizen of the United States of America, a global citizen, right? Because we want to care about everybody and have that empathy and compassion for the other people.
Right.
Yeah.
And just as we're wrapping it up here, I just want to touch on, so often people will be like, well, I'm an English teacher, or oh, I'm a math teacher, or that doesn't go with, my curriculum. This is where cross-curricular instruction is so important, because current events, being culturally sensitive to others, non-biased, culturally aware, none of that falls in any one curriculum. It is our responsibility as all educators to check ourselves first and then go in and teach with a heart that is opening minds to build the resiliency of the community, of the state, of the nation, and of our world as a whole, by building that camaraderie regardless of race, gender, age, so that people and that we're teaching go out into the world and share that. I always say, when you have experienced something and it's been a struggle that you've overcome, well, that's part of your story now. So you have the opportunity to soften the blow or help someone else through that same story. And that's the same thing here, is when we start to understand, as teachers, as parents, as citizens, then it's part of our story and part of our responsibility to help other people be more culturally aware, culturally sensitive, and unified. And make this place the best it can be.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that's what we are here for. So banishing biases, whether it, in your own home with your own children, right? It starts at home, right? Because you have to practice it, right?
Right.
And you have to show your own children, but then you bring it in. You have to bring it into your classroom, because we want our next generation to think differently and see things differently, because as we're seeing in our society, history is starting to repeat itself, and that's not what I
No.
don't think any of our ancestors, even
Right.
2,500 years ago, wanted this to happen. So let's make sure that we are putting our best foot forward. We know we wear 1,000 hats in a day, and this is something else, but like we said last time, this is not a judgment. This is not to make anyone feel bad. But if this is not what you're in for,
Right.
this is something you need to rethink, because you have lives in your hand every day.
That you're molding.
Yeah.
We're molding every day.
You could ruin a child's life.
Right.
And I'm saying, like, literally, not like, but we have a high rate of suicide,
Right.
like we mentioned last time, in our county where we live. And I know, and it's very high around the United States, just in our country.
Right.
Okay. So think about kids that are being bullied at school, and then their teachers make them feel a certain type of way in class, which in turn makes them feel worse when the other kids start to chime in.
Right.
We have to really see our biases. What are your biases? Are you treating kids fairly? Are you playing favorites? You need
Right.
to stop doing that. I'm sorry. You really do.
Right. The role of education has completely changed. And as we continue to teach in a pandemic, we have even more needs at walking in our door.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know what baggage, what worries, what pains our students bring to us. And they don't know ours. But our role as the educator, as the adult in the room, is to set aside whatever we brought with us, leave it at the door, check it at the door, put our welcoming face on, and make that environment an environment that helps every individual learner thrive in whatever way drives them and fires them up in education. And if you can't fire them up to teach them, just like Susanna was saying, some content subject matter, if English doesn't fire that kid up, your heart of gold and your connection is what's going to be remembered in that child and make the difference. You could be the one molding and shaping and telling that child that tomorrow is a brighter tomorrow, and you are shaping all of that. You have a class of kids that maybe seem so diverse and different, and at the end of the school year, because of how you taught and how you brought a more worldly view to everyone, they are united and they're tight and they're
Right.
sad to leave each other.
Right. They're like a family. They
Right.
really literally become a family, especially if you're in the elementary setting
Mm-hmm.
and you're teaching all the subjects and you have those students every day, or you're a homeroom teacher. You as a homeroom teacher, secondary school, you can create that family atmosphere because a lot of them don't have that at home, and you can create that for them, which really
Right.
you have so much power, and we
Mm-hmm.
want to empower you to know that you have it in you. Just dig deep and you can get it out.
That's
And
right.
I think that banishing biases, next time we're going to talk about trickle down effectiveness on how leadership from the administration comes down to us also.
And impacts us as teachers and how we teach our students. Because, you know, every piece of every spoke in the tire is an important piece, and we'll show that it stands true
Yes.
in the academic world as well.
Right, and
So
we just also, and before we end, I just want to say also, like we talked about negativity last time, let's try to think positive. You see, like I said, stay away from social media a little bit. Like, start putting those positive things. Christine is big on quotes. I love her inspirational stuff. She'll send me stuff. We even created a prayer that
right,
we say, just because we have a vision board,
right,
we want to, these are stepping stones for us. But you're going to complain all
right.
the time, you're stuck, you're not happy, this might not be the profession, and no one is judging you. I'm not judging you. I'm just saying that, I want a world of happy people. I really
Mm-hmm.
do. So if this isn't, something for you, you can go into
Right.
something else, because honestly, let's think about it. You can be a graphic designer after this year. You can even work as a hospital administrator. It doesn't, you can do any type of data. Think about what our job entails. So do you have to
Right.
stay in this profession? No.
But we would love you
I
to
know,
stay in
of
it.
course.
So when you see negative Nellie walking
Yeah.
down the
Or
hall,
bad mouthing.
yes, go the opposite
Yeah.
direction, because we know misery loves company, and we know when we have all those hats we're juggling and someone comes and starts to complain to us, that we just want to dump too.
It's
We
a
want
human
to,
nature. It's
right,
human nature.
and we
One
want
event.
to, right,
Yeah.
we want to vent, we want to let it out, and then before you know it, we're fueling negative energy throughout a school building. Instead of being that person and you see someone, you know, go home and vent. If
Yes.
you see someone in your
Not to your husband or wife, because they don't, marrying an educator is not easy.
That's right. So if you see that person that's negative, the best thing that you could do is like, oh my gosh, I know your day is going to get better. I'm wishing you well, and move on, because you do not have any space on your plate to be weighed down with someone else's negativity. So, like Susanna's saying, things are changing and we want people to be realistic about education. It is a calling, it is a passion, and we want everyone to love what they do, but the piece that we're sharing is that it's changing, and if you feel like you can't change with it and you can't take on, if your mantra is that's not my responsibility,
Yeah.
then that's where you need to do that bias check too, because that bias of, well, this is what I signed up for, I'm teaching class, I'm grading papers, I'm going home, that's not what the profession looks like anymore. So that's a bias that you've got to let go of. We have so many roles, and we know after teaching in a pandemic,
Yes.
we can do it, and you can do it.
You got this.
Yeah,
You
just
got
make good
this.
friend
You are
choices at
loved,
work.
and you got this. Yeah, yeah, and work with your team. You
Right.
know what I mean? Everybody has a team that they
Yeah.
work with, and sometimes it's hard because you might not have the same personalities, or you don't hang out after work or something like that. But if you work together, you're modeling that behavior for the students in
Right.
your class also. One time a teacher yelled at me in front of my whole class, and one of the kids was like, "Why don't you say anything?" Da, da, da. And I'm like, because really, do I have to? She was yelling at me. I let her take out her frustrations on me, and I took the high road. And that's sometimes what you have to do. It's a teachable moment for them, so they can see that because when you react, right, so, or someone's attacking you, sometimes it's better to just be quiet, especially when you're around a lot
Right.
of children, because now they see that, oh, she didn't say anything, wow, and I look up to her, and, she just said a couple of words, and she just, the other person just walked out of the room even more upset than they were when they came in. So you actually taught them something. And that's, one of the things that we just like, we want you to take with you in your toolbox today. But thank you so much for joining us, and we
We
appreciate.
could keep
I
talking
know.
because we're chatterboxers, but we enjoy our time together with each other and with you, and we hope you'll join us for episode 3, Trickle Down Effectiveness. Thanks so much.
Love ya.